JD Bertrand, Jase McClellan, and Zion Logue. Did the Falcons land three potential sleepers on day 3 of the NFL draft?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black. Been covering the Falcons for a lifetime, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me each and every day as everydayers that make it your first watch, your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we will be joined by three hosts of the Locked On college football side of things. Locked On Irish's Tyler Wojciak to talk JD Bertrand, Locked On Bama's Luke Robinson to talk Jase McClellan, and Locked On Bulldogs Clint Shamblin to talk Zion Logue. And first up, we got to talk about the dog. No, not the Georgia Bulldog, a dog on the football field in JD Bertrand with Locked On Irish's Tyler Wojciak right now. Let's talk a little bit about JD Bertrand and sort of starting at the beginning. He is from the Atlanta area and sort of initially was committed to go to Georgia, and that didn't quite work out. And he wound up going to Notre Dame sort of as a preferred walk-on, 4-star recruit. And then obviously eventually earned himself a scholarship. But I'm curious, just going back, say 5 years, that when he first arrived at South Bend, were there sort of high expectations for JD Bertrand and what he was going to do for the Irish?
I wouldn't say that he had low expectations, but let me just say he certainly exceeded all the expectations that most people had for him when he was a recruit. And don't get me wrong. It wasn't like he was some lowly 3-star who was just scrapping to make the team. Like, he was a 4-star prospect. I think 24/7 Sports had him as like a top 20 linebacker, like fringe top 20. So the fact that he was even considered by Georgia means a lot, even though he's from the area. I believe he's from Roswell, Georgia. So, he was a good high school player. I think that now when you look at what Georgia recruits on a year-to-year basis, like, if you're not even in the top 100, do they even look at you? So from that standpoint, yes, I think that's kind of why Georgia moved on from him, but he ended up at Notre Dame. And I could not describe a more perfect fit at the University of Notre Dame. His brother also went to Notre Dame, was a pitcher on the baseball team. So it always seemed like a perfect fit. And then once he got on campus, it became very clear that he is a dog. He's going to work harder than whoever he's competing against. And that's a big reason why he had so much success in college.
Well, you talk about that work ethic. Raheem Morris, Falcons head coach, sort of famously called him Captain America after the Falcons had drafted him. And it seems like the nickname fits because he's a literal Boy Scout. He wound up being an academic Heisman finalist, a 2-time team captain, led the team in tackles for 3 years, is noted for that sort of professional approach when it comes to his diet and training regimen, things that he learned from various mentors that were former NFL star linebackers like James Laurinaitis and Sean Lee and Luke Kuechly. Basically the only thing that seemed to be missing from JD Bertrand's repertoire was the actual super soldier serum. But sort of what do sort of these accolades say about him in your eyes?
I think they're fitting, for as perfect as his persona may be. And don't get me wrong, he deserves all of that. I do want to say that he is a dog on the field, and like, he is able to have a really buttoned up life off the field. But when it comes to being a badass in the football field, like, he's going to talk some trash. He's going to get in the mix. And if he lights you up, he's going to let you know about it. So I think that's sort of the cool thing about JD Bertrand is, he seems like a tremendous person, absolutely great dude on and off the field. But man, when he steps in between those lines, he's a really good player. He's mean, he's nasty. And that's really everything you want out of a linebacker.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because having watched a little bit of him, if there's a 300-pound offensive lineman between him and the football, like, he's going through that guy. Like, he plays absolutely with his hair on fire. And I'm curious, talking about him on the field, I think the general sort of rap on JD Bertrand is, very instinctual linebacker, but may not necessarily have the high-end athleticism that is typically coveted. Obviously, why he was a 5th round pick as opposed to maybe an earlier round pick. I know there was some talk, going into last year on sort of how high he could be drafted at various Notre Dame blogs and whatnot. But I'm just curious, sort of, do you think that's a fair criticism of him, of saying like he's more instincts than athleticism? And do you feel like those instincts can kind of offset maybe some of those athletic deficiencies if you see that as an issue for him?
Yes, I think he's more instinctual than he is athletic. And I mean that as a compliment because he just has he has great football instincts. Like whenever there's a play, it seems like JD Bertrand is always around the ball. Now, part of that has to do with his intense work ethic in the film room. He knows where guys are going to be. And then when he's on the field, he's able to diagnose what the offense is doing and then make a play on the ball. But I think that his athleticism is extremely underrated. And it is so unfortunate for him that he was not able to run at the combine and he was not able to run at the pro day, because when he was at the Senior Bowl, he was having an outstanding week. He was really impressing a lot of people. And then I think he suffered an injury maybe in that game or sometime afterwards when he was training. So he was unable to run the 40. And for years, me and Notre Dame fans and some other people who cover the team, like it basically was a divide how you felt about JD Bertrand up until this last year. Like I feel like he quieted, really any criticisms of him as a college player in his senior year. He was outstanding for Notre Dame, but there was this knock on him that he wasn't athletic and that he couldn't run sideline to sideline. I think part of that has to do with when he was playing in 2021. He was basically thrust into the action because of an injury. And there were certainly times where he looked a little bit slow, but he was also playing out of position. He was playing the will linebacker as opposed to the Mike. So once he was playing his natural position, I thought he was very athletic. And I was so excited to watch him run the 40-yard dash and run some of the 3 cone drills and stuff, because I was like, finally, he's going to run a terrific 40 time. He's going to prove all these people wrong who said he wasn't athletic, that he wasn't going to be able to make it in the NFL. And then he suffers this injury. And to be honest, it might be a good thing for you as a Falcons fan, because I think that if he had actually been able to run the 40, his draft stock would have really risen, and he probably would have been drafted maybe early 4th. Either way, I don't know if it would have been a given that you guys would have been able to get him in the 5th round. Fortunately for you guys, wasn't able to. You guys got him. And I think he's really going to surprise some people with his athleticism.
So last question I have for you, Tyler, sort of, talking a little bit about JD Bertrand, sort of anything else you want to add in terms of what you foresee for him, at the next level after a very solid and illustrious college career?
Yeah, I feel bad for some of the undrafted linebackers, or maybe some of the guys who the Falcons drafted or picked up the year prior that are young guys, because they aren't going to make the team. JD Bertrand is going to make sure that he outworks every single one of them, and that guy is going to make the roster. He is one of those guys who I just have so much confidence. Like, I'm not saying he's going to be a Pro Bowler or anything like that, but JD Bertrand is a guy that every single NFL team would want on their team. Like he's that type of a player, great for the locker room. And I think he is going to set a standard that I'm not sure that other young guys are going to be able to keep up with. And that's not even necessarily a knock on them. I just think that he is so driven, he is so motivated, and he is so focused. And you kind of alluded to that at the beginning with his diet, his preparation, all of that stuff. Like, he is going to go to the NFL and he is going to outwork every single guy around him. I think he's going to make the team. I think, the worst case scenario, absolute worst case for JD Bertrand, barring injury, obviously, is that he's just a really productive special teams player for years to come. I think that it might take him a little bit of time before he becomes completely acclimated to the speed and all of that at the NFL level, which is, completely fair for a 5th round draft pick. But in time, I feel confident that he is going to develop into a starter and be a very productive player. But I think you're going to start to see immediate dividends with him because he is just that type of a worker.
So I want to thank Tyler for joining us, and it's not our last conversation on JD Bertrand on this podcast, as we'll do a full breakdown of him to begin next week's humble shows. But there's more to come on today's Locked On Falcons with Locked On Bama's Luke Robinson explaining why Falcons 6th round running back Jase McClellan reminds him a little bit of Josh Jacobs, and why that will make him the ideal RB2 behind Bijan Robinson here in Atlanta. Guys, it is summertime, which means baseball is king, and the Braves are getting back into their groove, which means it's time for you guys to get back into the ballpark. GameTime is making it easy. What you see is what you get with GameTime. With their all-in prices means you're not going to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And They also have the views from your seat. Everybody loves it. I loves it. You can sort of pick ahead of time where you're going to sit so that you can be in the perfect spot to catch that foul ball or whatever, whether you're into baseball, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you. GameTime is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, guys, before we join Luke Robinson of Locked On Bama, I want to tell you about the Locked On Sports Today, the free 24/7 sports streaming program for you each and every day, bringing you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So now let's talk with Locked On Bama's Luke Robinson on Jase McClellan. Starting off, he was a guy that kind of had to wait his turn at Alabama, the previous 2 years kind of serving as that number 2 guy behind Brian Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. And this past year finally got the chance to sort of be the lead guy. I'm just curious, in your assessment, how did he sort of handle that responsibility?
Well, first of all, I think he handled it really well. I mean, it's a good kid from a good family. I mean, that much is, maybe it's not as important in the pros because it's just about what have you done on the field. But I think people will be happy to know how good of a person he is. Number one. Number two, I think that is also illustrated by the fact how well he did handle sticking around at Alabama. Look, it wasn't just Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Robinson and Roydell Williams and that whole crowd. It was also Najee Harris. He was there in 2020. And Jase McClellan could have had another year, either, transfer or come back to Alabama. But he wanted to go ahead and go pro, and I think that was the smart move. I think that's what he should have done, and he landed at a great spot. But as far as how he handled it this year, I thought he did really well. Look, if you saw the college football semifinal game against Michigan, he scored 2 touchdowns. He played very well there. And look, he's not the most explosive back of the Nick Saban era. He's not the fastest back. He's not the one with the best nose for the end zone. He's not the best receiver. But if you were to categorize all those things and make a top 3, I think he may be in the top 3 in a few of those categories. I can tell you this, he's a really good receiver. And I think it sort of goes, this may be a silly way to put it, but Jalen Milroe missed him on a pretty wide open and well-designed wheel route play against Texas that would have clearly been a touchdown if Milroe had hit him. And honestly, I think if that play connects, it's one of those plays where I think you see over and over again and people are like, oh, this guy's a great receiver. Well, he was a great receiver without that. They just don't know it because there weren't many, like a lot of screen plays for long touchdowns or wheel routes for long touchdowns or splitting him out like Alabama did with Kenyon Drake against Florida in 2014 for about an 87-yard bomb. There wasn't a lot of plays like that. But I thought he was a leader this year. I thought that he certainly handled the role of splitting a lot of carries very, very well. And, if he hadn't gotten hurt a couple of times, there's no telling how much better his career would have been. One time in 2021, I mean, Alabama certainly could have used him in that national championship game against Georgia. I think that he is a really, really solid player. He's not Bijan Robinson, who Atlanta already has, and they don't need him to be Bijan Robinson. In fact, I can see a big positive to Jase McClellan just being a really good backup in terms of Falcons' eyes. Because if he goes out there and he's Bijan Robinson, he ain't going to be in Atlanta very long because Bijan's going to be there. So I think that there's certainly I think he's going to be a very long-term, really good number 2, occasionally number 1 in an injury situation running back in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a superstar, but I'll tell you what he's got. He's also got a good nose for the end zone. He really does. I know I said earlier he's not the best at Alabama when it comes to that, certainly. But I went back just because I knew this interview was coming, and I watched some YouTube highlights of Jase McClellan, and it struck me how many times he ran into a pile and then came out of the pile on the other side, knowing where the end zone was and knowing, okay, I can't get through this crease. but he somehow just slipped his way through there. And he's a big back. And look, here's another thing. I know it's high school, but he scored 122 touchdowns in high school at Aledo, Texas. It's a lot of touchdowns.
Now, you mentioned before how he performed against Michigan. I thought, again, I haven't watched as many of his games this past year as you have, but I thought, based off of what I've seen, the sample I've seen, that was probably his best game of the year, sort of rising to the occasion in a big moment. And I'm just curious, was that something that was a regular occurrence for Jase McClellan, sort of stepping up in those big moments like that?
Yeah, I think that was his best game. I'm with you on that. There's not a game. I think he played well against Tennessee. There's not a game where you say Alabama won that game because of Jase McClellan, though. That is probably, all these other running backs you're talking about, Derrick Henry and Najee and Mark Ingram. I mean, they're Trent Richardson, all of those guys. Alabama won some games because of those guys, like their individual efforts in one particular game. I don't know that was the case with Jase, but I don't think that's not really fair either, because Alabama had so many stars while he was there that you don't want to take anything away from him. And he never was the number one feature back. I mean, even this year, the favorite player on a team is always the backup quarterback or the backup running back, right? Because everybody's like, you wait till you get a look at this guy. And for Alabama this year, people are going to see Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, and maybe Richard Young too. Three guys that everybody's just been chomping at the bit to see. And they go, man, they got so much potential. Oh, meanwhile, Jase McClellan, he's rushing for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's rushing for 102 yards in a receiving score or whatever. And we're like, that's great. But we can't wait to see the next guy for some reason. I think he went very undervalued in the draft. I think the Falcons got a steal in the 6th round with him. And I think you guys are going to be really, really happy with him. He's going to be a hard worker, I can tell you that. And I think he's going to impress all you guys a lot.
Well, we talked a little bit about this sort of Alabama pipeline with all the sort of talented running backs that they put in the NFL the last, 10, 15 years. And you've already sort of mentioned, like, if you stacked Jase McClellan against some of those guys, he may not be at the top of any of those lists, but he'd probably be in the top 3. And so I think that speaks to what you're talking about with that sort of all-around skill set. But I'm just curious for, the Falcon fans listening that may be a little bit more familiar with some of those NFL running backs is, whether it's like a Kenyon Drake or TJ Yeldon or Brian Robinson, is there one particular of those guys, Josh Jacobs, et cetera, that like Jase's skill set is resembling in terms of that all-around ability that sort of stands out that you can say, yeah, he reminds me a lot of this guy that used to be a star at Alabama?
Yeah, I think Jase is probably in between Josh Jacobs and TJ Yeldon. I would say both of those running backs were better than he was in college, but and he may even have just a hint of Kenyon Drake in the sense that, look, people forget Jase McClellan has broken off a few 80-yard scores. He had one, maybe it was 79 yards against Texas in Austin. In the first quarter, that was Alabama's first touchdown of the game. He had one against Arkansas in 2020 it was mop-up duty, but hey, it counts. He didn't have he didn't break off a lot of long runs. I mean, Derrick Henry did a lot of that. But I think that Josh Jacobs, what made him so special was he was a good blocker. He's a great blocker. He's a great receiver. He was tough. I mean, that's a kid that had to sleep in his car sometimes because he was homeless. I mean, you weren't going to mess with that guy. And he also was a tough runner, and he also had the speed. And I feel like while Jase McClellan isn't as good of a receiver as Josh Jacobs was, I think he may be a better runner. Jacobs is the better overall back and does a lot of things better, but Jase McClellan may be a pure, like, just hand him the ball and let him go, may be a better running back in that regard. Because I don't remember even Jacobs having, I don't even know what his longest career touchdown was. It certainly wasn't 80 yards, if I remember right. So I would say somewhere in that neighborhood. If you were ranking all the Saban era running backs, I mean, that's the other thing. I think Josh Jacobs would be looked upon differently if he weren't stacked against a Najee Harris, a TJ Yeldon, a Kenyon Drake, a Derrick Henry, a Mark Ingram, or Trent Richardson, and you just go on and on and on. Yeah. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, it's just so many. And then the problem is you're like, okay, where's Jase McClellan fit in? Well, if those guys weren't around, Jase McClellan would be way on up the list. But those guys most of them were high draft picks and or NFL All Pros. So, I mean, it's kind of tough. But the good news about this, and this is a great news for Falcons fans, that there's a lot of tread left on those tires. I mean, Jase, he never did have 1,000-yard season at Alabama. His best year was this past year at a little over 800 yards, and that's very nice. But remember, now you're doing 800 yards, and Alabama played 14 games. So it's getting to 1,000 yards isn't what it used to be. It's a little bit easier, and Jase McClellan never did that. That's a bad thing, but it's a good thing in the sense it also tells you he got fewer carries than somebody like a Derrick Henry or a Mark Ingram, who, Alabama just had to wear out sometimes.
Now, as you mentioned before, Luke, no one's expecting Jase McClellan to come in and take a bunch of carries with Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, 1,000-yard rusher 2 years ago here in Atlanta. So the expectation with Jase McClellan is he's going to kind of come in, sort of fit in where he can get in, and potentially maybe start his career kind of similar to what he did at Alabama, which is as that sort of role player, maybe get some reps on special teams. How do you sort of see that sort of transition for him? And then, obviously, hopefully down the line, like we saw at Alabama, as he gets and gains more experience, he can start to carve out maybe a bigger chunk of that role and be that sort of high-end RB2 that you're talking about he has the potential to be. So what do you sort of expect that sort of immediate transition for Jase McClellan in 2024 for the Falcons?
Yeah, I feel like he will be a special teams guy, both maybe on return and on coverage. I think he could be good in both of those arenas. And, I think he'll do whatever it takes. And, that's another good thing about playing in Alabama is you get humbled pretty quickly. And you're ready for the pros because you've been playing with a bunch of pros. And every week, so you've got a target on your back. And so he's been humbled, certainly just like everybody else who's come through the system. And I think he's going to be fine with any kind of role if that means, hey, I'm a third down back occasionally, or, hey, I'm on kickoff coverage. I'm not even returning the ball. I think he's all for it. And he's the kind of guy that would take on that role and not pout about it and do really well with it. I think he's, dead set on making a mark in the pros, some description. And so I don't think that playing on special teams in any area will scare him at the least, and he'll be good at it. I really do. I think this is I think when you talk about, all right, NFL guys that you drafted, how long do you think they'll be in the league? Now, I mean, that's a loaded question now because people get paid so much money, they can retire earlier. But I can easily see Jase McClellan being a 7 to 9 year guy in the league. Hopefully the whole time with the Falcons, maybe bouncing around a little bit or whatever. But that's a good long time in the NFL.
So thank Luke for the insight there. And, now we're going to move forward and talk about whether Zion Logue's kind of a poor man's Devontae Wyatt. We'll see where Locked On Bulldogs Clint Shamblin thinks about that coming up to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So here we guys have Locked On Bulldogs Clint Shamblin breaking down why you can't sleep on Zion Logue. Georgia's well renowned for producing high quality defensive players, especially on that defensive line. Sure. And because of that, Zion Logue was a part of a deep rotation there at Georgia. Would it be fair in your eyes to call him a role player? And do you expect that sort of description of, a piece of the puzzle to carry over into the NFL? Or do you feel like because Georgia has so much talent, like it's kind of hard to kind of shine unless you're Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis. And maybe there's a little bit more untapped potential for someone like Zion Logue as he transitions to the next level.
Zion Logue had the unfortunate circumstance of being on the aforementioned teammates of the aforementioned players. Because, he just got absolutely buried by first-round elite talent that are in the league already. And I was quite impressed him coming back and developing. He got his starts in his final year at Georgia. He started some reserve role. He was on the national championship teams with the Jordan Davises, with the Jalen, all of those guys. I think here's what's wild about Kirby Smart. So Kirby Smart, Georgia, knows one thing about playing football in the SEC, and he is about it every single year. If you don't win the trenches, you won't win the game. He doesn't care about anything else. He cares about trench play, and he cares about defensive linemen who are able to engage their blocker. Blocker ain't engaging them. They engage the blocker. They shed, they get off, and they make sure that their job is done. Zion Logue fit Kirby Smart's system so well that he trusted him with that. And so it's really unfortunate. I don't think Zion Logue was able to shine so much in that defense because I think his skill set is a little bit more limited than other defensive linemen in the league. That is certainly true. He is not, he's not somebody that's going to all of a sudden bust on the scene and lead the league in sacks his rookie year. But he is somebody that's going to do his job very well. And if linebacker play is important to you, he's going to make sure blockers don't get off on linebacker play. He's not going to get pushed 5 yards off the ball. Now, he's not going to be the J.J. Watt inside just crushing people, but he is and shown himself to be competent, trusted, and work within the scheme. So if you have a schematic ability, that's why role player is a little bit hard for me to say. If you have a schematic ability where you say, hey, Zion, I need you to take this 3 tech right here, or I need you to take this inside tech here. I need you to blow the shoulder off this guard, or I need you to retain gap integrity. Don't get blown up. Keep guys engaged. Fight with your hands and work upfield to make sure the pocket is not busted on your lane. He's going to do that perfectly fine. If that's what you need of him, awesome. If you need a difference playmaker that's going to be the standout on your defense, Zion Logue probably not your dude. So that's a long story of saying, yeah, maybe role player is an apt description, but I see him as a huge teammate for a defense that could get off the ball and fly around. And so if the Falcons are asking him, let's be a dude that is just here, sit in your lane, take control of your responsibility. We're not going to ask you to play outside yourself. He's going to do that very well. So a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. You see the flashes of power and kind of dominance, the ability to sort of control the line of scrimmage as you're discussing. And I'm curious because, he was a 3-star prospect. He's surrounded by a bunch of 4- and 5-star prospects. And so do you look at that as you're talking about a guy that's going out there and doing his job is kind of a testament to him because, Georgia has, theoretically, if you buy into recruiting rankings and whatnot, more talented players around him. But yet, he, as you mentioned, for like 3 years, he's been a consistent and reliable contributor to him. And, what do you sort of attribute that from Zion Logue to basically be able to carve out a role, on a defense that arguably has, 12 guys that may be, more talented than him, but yet, he's out there, getting, almost as many snaps as Nazir Stackhouse and Jalen Carter and some of these other guys in previous years.
That's exactly right. There's another guy on that defensive line, Devontae Wyatt, who Daniel, my co-host, and we loved him. He was actually, when we're looking at missing parts, we had talent elsewhere, but Zion Logue and Devontae, they fit into a scheme that said we need somebody on the defensive line that is going to just hold down their position regardless. We have insane linebacker play. We have insane edge play. We just can't have you screw up. We need to trust you, basically not think about you, right? The old adage of if you're not hearing a tackle's name, that means he's doing his job on the offensive line. Kind of the same thing with defensive line, interior defensive linemen. If you're not hearing their name, they're not getting blown off the ball and they're not getting that ear hole and driven off and having the running back go through where they were supposed to be. And so I think what a testament to him is, and just like Devontae Wyatt, who went on to do and is still doing great things for the Green Bay Packers. It's going to sound weird because nobody thinks Devontae Wyatt. What they think is Jordan Davis's and all the rest of them. Zion's kind of like a poor man's Devontae Wyatt, right? Where he's going to have the strength, he's going to have the power, he's going to have those low churn RPMs if you're into trucks or SUVs or that sort of thing. Like he's not going to hit up to the 85, 90 right off the highway real quick, real fast. But man, he's just going to churn out. He's going to tow that boat right uphill just fine, and it's going to be smooth sailing. So yeah, I think if you look at what he was able to do coming in and hold his own with alphas, like all those dudes were not only the best in their high school, best in their county, best in their state, probably where all they came from. He was able to be there in trusted rotation, which should tell you something about his ability to play up to other talent, right? So on his own, yeah, maybe you look at the combine and it's kind of average. It's not eye popping. Look at his production, doesn't have the sack numbers, but again, ask guys that played with him, Nakobe Deans, right? The Channing Tindalls, who say, No, I was able to be what I was because he allowed me to be. And they all loved playing with him, and he did. He cut out time in a stacked defensive line room. That should tell you something about his talent.
Yeah. And you talk about, helping out the N'Kobe Deans and the Channing Tindalls of the world. He played up and down the line from what I've seen, multitude of techniques, playing the nose, lining up over a tackle in an odd front or whatever. Do you feel like, when you're projecting Zion Logue to the NFL, is there one specific role that you think he's maybe best at? Or is it more a sort of a jack of all trades type of versatile, flexible skill set that is more of the defining trait for him?
I think if I'm the Falcons, the reason why I drafted him was I wanted versatility with him. I wanted him to move him down the line, and I wanted to see what I had on other defensive spots so that I can plug him in where I'm deficient, knowing I can put him different plays. I can put him in different packages as well. I could put him in that third down, quote, pass rush where the draw is in play or those screens in play where I need somebody to hold down the middle and not just be a bump on the log at the same time. I could see that all taking effect and playing out. So I think his versatility is his main contributing factor of why he is an asset to an NFL team. I don't see him playing any particular style of defense or any particular position. That is good for the Falcons because here's what it means. It means of all the other draft picks he got going, and look, Falcons fans knows y'all missed on some and you hit on maybe like 2 or 3. But if you just right now, you need to raise the floor on a defense. That's the goal. The ceiling is who knows what, but we just can't suck as bad as we suck, right? We need to raise the floor. That's what he will do for you, right? So if you know anything about football, I mean, if you are able to mitigate down and crunch down shave off 3 points per game from a defense, a lot of 3-point games happen in the NFL season. If you get a couple of wins out of that because a guy is able to help your net average or expected run defense by a half a point or a full point by being able to switch around and get different guys in the rotation, you'll take that all day. So I think he's one of many of a group. He's not going to be King Arthur, but he could be one of the knights at the round table for sure and help the defense.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here. And as I mentioned earlier, thank you to Clint. Our next episode here on Locked On Falcons on Sunday night on YouTube, Monday morning on your preferred podcast platform should be a full breakdown of JD Bertrand. I'll give you my thoughts on him for at least a full 30 minutes. And if you don't want to miss that episode, make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today for your second listen, Locked On Sports Atlanta for your second listen. And of course, big news in the Hawks world. So check out Locked On Hawks with Brad Rowland as your second listen of the day. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every